Laura had always been drawn to the mysteries of nature. As an experienced hiker, she had traversed forests, mountains, and valleys, seeking the solitude and beauty of the wild. So, when she heard about the Whispering Woods, an uncharted forest nestled deep in the mountains, she couldn't resist the call. Locals spoke of the forest in hushed tones, warning travelers to stay away. They claimed the woods were cursed, filled with the voices of those who had ventured too far and never returned. Undeterred, Laura decided to explore the forest and document her journey. Armed with her backpack, a compass, and a notebook, she set out early one foggy morning. The trailhead was barely visible through the mist, an overgrown path leading into the dark, dense woods. The air was thick with moisture, and the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. Laura took a deep breath and stepped into the forest, feeling a shiver run down her spine. The deeper she ventured, the more the atmosphere changed. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining above her, blocking out the sunlight. Shadows danced across the forest floor, moving in ways that made her uneasy. Laura dismissed the growing sense of dread, attributing it to nerves and the eeriness of being alone in an unfamiliar place. After a couple of hours, she paused to catch her breath and consult her map. That's when she heard it, a faint whisper carried on the breeze. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked around, seeing no one. She strained to listen, and there it was again, a soft murmur, like a voice calling her name. Laura shook her head, trying to brush off the chill creeping up her spine. "It's just the wind," she muttered to herself, though deep down, she knew it was something more. The whispers grew louder as she continued on her path, threading through the trees like an invisible web. They seemed to come from all around her, filling the air with a disquieting energy. She quickened her pace, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of her steps. It felt as if the forest was watching her, its presence pressing in from every direction. As Laura ventured deeper into the woods, the whispers intensified. They weren't just random noises carried by the wind. They formed words, faint but distinct. "Turn back," they seemed to say, echoing in her ears. She tried to ignore them, focusing on the path ahead. But each step felt heavier, the air around her growing thicker, almost suffocating. The forest itself began to change. The trees, once lush and green, now appeared twisted and gnarled, their bark covered in a strange, dark moss. The undergrowth thickened, roots snaking across the forest floor like veins. It was as if the forest was alive, breathing, and shifting around her. The path she had been following started to fade, replaced by a chaotic tangle of vegetation that blocked her way. Laura pulled out her compass, only to find the needle spinning wildly. A wave of fear washed over her. She was lost. She looked up, scanning her surroundings, but everything looked the same. An endless expanse of towering trees and shadowy underbrush. Panic surged within her, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. "Stay calm," she told herself. "You've been in tough spots before. You can get through this." She turned in what she hoped was the direction of the trailhead, but the forest resisted her every move. Branches snagged her clothes, roots tripped her, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They called her name now, in a multitude of voices, some soft and pleading, others harsh and commanding. Laura felt her skin crawl, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. It was as if the forest was trying to pull her deeper into its depths, refusing to let her leave. After what felt like hours of struggling through the dense forest, Laura stumbled into a small clearing. The change in scenery was sudden and jarring. The forest seemed to open up around her, revealing a patch of soft, moss-covered ground bathed in an eerie, muted light. For a brief moment, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she could use this spot to regain her bearings. She glanced around, her eyes catching something peculiar. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient-looking stone, partially buried in the moss. Carved into its surface were strange symbols and runes, their edges worn smooth by time. The stone radiated a cold, unsettling energy that made Laura's skin prickle. Against her better judgment, she approached it, her curiosity overcoming her fear. As she reached out to touch the stone, A wave of memories washed over her. Faces and voices from her past flashed through her mind. Friends, family, and moments she had long forgotten. But alongside these familiar images, there were others. Faces she didn't recognize, scenes she had never lived. It was as if the forest was showing her glimpses of lives it had claimed over the centuries. Laura stumbled back, gasping for breath. The whispers returned, swirling around her like a vortex. "This is our place," they murmured. "You belong here." The clearing darkened, shadows stretching across the ground toward her, wrapping around her ankles like chains. She fought against the rising panic, shaking her head violently. "No!" she cried out, breaking free from the stone's grip. She turned and fled from the clearing, her heart racing. The forest around her seemed to close in, the trees leaning forward as if trying to ensnare her. The whispers followed, their tone shifting from pleading to menacing. Laura ran, not knowing where she was going, only that she had to escape. Laura's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed through the underbrush, her feet stumbling over roots and rocks. The forest had transformed into a nightmarish labyrinth, every tree and bush seeming to move and change as she ran. Her fear fueled her steps, but it also clouded her mind, making it impossible to focus on finding a way out. As she tore through the foliage, she glimpsed movement out of the corner of her eye. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, flitted between the trees, keeping pace with her. She turned her head, catching fleeting glimpses of people, men, women, children, all dressed in clothing from different eras. Their faces were pale and expressionless, their eyes hollow and fixed on her. The sight made her heart leap into her throat. These weren't people. They were spirits, lost souls wandering the forest. The whispers grew louder, now taking on the voices of the phantoms. They called out to her, some pleading for help, others warning her to flee. "You shouldn't be here," one voice hissed, its tone cold and foreboding. "This place is not for the living." She slowed, fear and exhaustion taking their toll. The figures closed in, forming a loose circle around her, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. Laura's mind raced. How could she escape this nightmare? The forest seemed alive, its power overwhelming, drawing her into its dark embrace. Laura stood amidst the encircling spirits, her heart hammering against her chest. The figures seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the forest, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling light. She could feel the weight of their stares, a pressure that bore down on her, making it hard to breathe. The whispers continued, a cacophony of voices layered upon one another, forming a chilling harmony that filled the air. "You must choose," a voice echoed, louder and clearer than the others. Laura turned to find one of the spirits standing mere inches from her. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its eyes, pale, hollow, and piercing, were fixed on hers. "Stay with us, or face the forest's wrath," it hissed. Laura's mind raced. The forest was no longer just a collection of trees and underbrush. It was alive, sentient, and hungry. The souls around her were trapped, and she realized with a jolt that they had once been just like her. Explorers, wanderers, adventurers who had ventured too far into the woods. Now, they were prisoners, bound by the forest's dark power. "I don't belong here," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "I came to explore, to understand, not to stay." The spirit's eyes narrowed, and the air grew colder, the shadows around them darkening further. "None who enter truly understand," the spirit replied. "But the forest demands a tribute. A soul for a soul." Laura's breath hitched. "A soul for a soul," she repeated, the words echoing ominously in her mind. She glanced around, her gaze locking with each spirit's for a fleeting moment. They were pleading, waiting for her to make a decision. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and she felt a creeping sensation up her legs, as if roots were trying to pull her down into the earth. The forest was impatient, growing restless. "Decide," the whispers urged, filling her head with a dizzying swirl of voices. "Stay, or face the consequences." With a surge of defiance, Laura broke away from the spirit's gaze, turning to run. She had no intention of giving herself up to the forest. There had to be a way out, some path she hadn't yet found. The whispers swelled around her, becoming a furious roar as she sprinted through the trees, pushing through thick undergrowth and clawing branches. The forest responded to her defiance. The shadows lengthened, twisting into unnatural shapes that reached out for her. The roots beneath her feet shifted and writhed, attempting to trip her, but she kept moving. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but adrenaline and sheer terror drove her forward. She was fighting for her life. Up ahead, she saw a faint glimmer of light filtering through the trees, a break in the forest's oppressive canopy. Hope flared within her, and she pushed herself harder, ignoring the sharp branches tearing at her skin. The light grew brighter, and she stumbled into another clearing, this one larger than the last. In its center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its trunk twisted into a grotesque form that resembled a human face. Laura slowed, her chest heaving as she approached the tree. Its roots spread out across the ground like skeletal hands, gripping the earth with a tenacity that sent a shiver down her spine. The air around it was thick, almost suffocating, and the whispers faded to a low murmur, circling around her in an almost hypnotic rhythm. She stepped closer, drawn by the tree's haunting presence. Carved into its bark were symbols similar to those on the stone in the earlier clearing. They glowed faintly, pulsating with a life of their own. It dawned on her that this tree was the heart of the forest, the source of its dark power. If she could confront it, maybe she could break free. Only the strong survive. A voice emanated from the tree, deep and resonant. Prove your worth, and the forest may let you go. Laura hesitated, her mind reeling with the implications. The forest was offering her a chance, one final trial. She had to confront its heart, to prove that she was more than just another soul to be consumed. Gathering her courage, she reached out to touch the tree's bark. The moment her fingers made contact, a shock ran through her body, and the world around her blurred. She found herself standing in a vast, endless forest. The trees towered over her, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out the sky. It was different from before, quieter, darker, and more oppressive. She glanced around, realizing she was no longer alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, the spirits of the forest, their eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You seek to leave," they intoned in unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that sent chills down her spine. "But first, you must face your fears, your regrets. Only then can you break free." The ground beneath her shifted, and roots erupted from the soil, twisting and writhing as they formed a ring around her. Within the circle, shadows rose, each one taking the shape of a figure from her past. People she had lost, decisions she had regretted, paths she had not taken. They stared at her with accusing eyes, their expressions cold and unforgiving. "Face them," the spirits commanded. "Acknowledge the darkness within you." Laura's breath came in ragged gasps. She wanted to run, to hide from the things she had buried deep within herself. But there was no escape. The forest demanded that she confront her own soul, to strip away the lies and the facade she had built. With trembling resolve, she took a step forward, facing the shadows one by one. "I have regrets," she admitted, her voice shaky but gaining strength. "I have made mistakes, hurt people, and chosen paths that led to pain. But that is part of who I am." She looked around at the figures, their faces twisted in anguish. "I cannot change the past, but I will not let it define me." The shadows wavered, their forms blurring and melting into the air. The circle of roots retracted, sinking back into the ground. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and clarity. Laura stood alone in the clearing, the ancient tree before her. Its bark no longer glowed, the symbols fading into nothingness. "You have faced the truth," the tree whispered, its voice softer now. "You may leave, but remember, the forest always watches." The forest around her began to shift, the trees pulling back to reveal a narrow path bathed in a faint, golden light. Laura took a deep, shaky breath. She had passed the trial, confronted the heart of the forest, and now it was giving her a way out. She turned to look at the ancient tree one last time, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. It had tested her, forced her to confront her deepest fears, but it had also given her a chance to escape. She stepped onto the path, her feet moving tentatively at first, then with more confidence. The whispers faded to a distant hum, and the air grew lighter with each step. The forest no longer felt like a prison. It was merely a shadowed memory, a place of trials she had endured. The light ahead grew brighter, beckoning her forward. Laura pressed forward, her heart pounding as the path guided her through the labyrinth of trees. The light at the end of the path grew brighter, illuminating the forest with a warm glow that pushed back the shadows. She could still feel the forest's presence around her, a lingering weight that seemed to watch her every move. Yet, the path remained clear, a golden thread that led her toward freedom. The forest around her gradually transformed. The trees were no longer twisted and dark. They returned to their natural form, lush and green. The air felt lighter, and the whispers faded into the background, becoming no more than faint echoes. With each step, Laura felt a surge of hope. She was leaving behind the nightmare, stepping out of the forest's grasp. As she neared the edge, she glanced back one last time. The woods stood silent, their towering presence no longer threatening, but almost somber, as if acknowledging her victory. She shivered, remembering the faces of the spirits and the darkness she had confronted. The forest had tested her, and she had survived, but she knew that it would not be so kind to everyone. Its whispers and shadows would continue to lure others into its depths, seeking new souls to challenge. Turning away, she stepped out into the open, her feet crunching against the gravel of the trailhead. Sunlight bathed her face, warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold darkness of the forest. Laura inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with fresh air. She had made it. She was free. Laura stood at the edge of the trailhead, her legs trembling from exhaustion and relief. She looked down at her hands, still dirty and scratched from her journey. It felt surreal to be back in the open, away from the oppressive grip of the forest. The sky stretched out above her, a brilliant blue that contrasted sharply with the shadowy canopy she had left behind. She took a moment to collect her thoughts, her mind replaying the events in the forest. The whispers, the phantoms, the ancient tree. All of it had been a trial, a test that had pushed her to confront the fears and regrets she had buried deep inside. In some strange way, the forest had forced her to acknowledge her own weaknesses and face the parts of herself she had avoided for so long. Laura glanced back at the forest. It loomed in the distance, silent and still, as if waiting for its next visitor. She felt a chill run down her spine, but it was different now. The fear was tempered with understanding. The forest was not evil. It was a place of trials, a realm that demanded truth and courage from those who entered. It offered a path to self-discovery, albeit at a high cost. With one last look, Laura turned away and started walking down the trail. She had survived the whispering woods, but she knew the experience would haunt her forever. The forest had changed her, leaving behind a mark that she would carry with her always. She had faced her darkness and emerged on the other side, stronger and more aware. If this tale of the Whispering Woods sent chills down your spine, make sure to hit subscribe for more terrifying stories of the supernatural. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to join us on our next eerie adventure. Have you ever encountered a place that made you question reality? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story intrigued you, give us a thumbs up to let us know. Remember, some paths in the forest are best left unexplored.